All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Check, check. We're going to just get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, for those watching, all right, so we'll get started here in a couple minutes. For those watching afterwards, we're just going to make sure that we actually. Hi, good to see you, Marlon. All right, good to see everyone logging in. All right, so we're just kind of testing audio. Can you guys hear me speaking okay? All right, so that once again, those of us that are kind of watching it afterwards, if you want, you may want to skip ahead a couple minutes so that we'll get people are getting logged in. We had some people send some pretty interesting questions. I think we'll have a good meeting tonight. But if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in live with the. We have the in the chat panel. I'm just adjusting my microphone a little bit here. Sorry, just had the audio not working just a couple minutes ago. But we'll get started here. So some more people logging in. All right. So good to see people logging in here. All right, so we have Omar from New Jersey. Dennis, I think you're in the UK. So got to kind of log in live. So we'll just kind of, Marlon, good to see you online. It's nice to meet you at the NAMM show last month. All right, with some more people logging in. I'm just opening up my document here where we have questions that people had sent in advance. Okay. All right. So about kind of naming tracks and regions, and then going to, okay, so we'll do kind of naming shortcuts for Dennis. All right. Good to see you, Robert from Montreal, and Joe from California. All right, so we'll go ahead and let me just making some notes here of questions people are asking. All right, James from Fairfield, California. All right. See if there's more questions. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Sorry, we got a little bit of a late start. I was having some issues with my little audio mixer, but we got all squared away right before. And we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, so once again, this is kind of a usually we have questions that people send in advance, as well as topics that are kind of raised live during the discussion. A lot of people watch this afterwards. So if you wanted to if you have questions for future meetings, you could leave them in the topics of this. Sometimes the live topics don't actually aren't visible after the meeting is then put on YouTube. But we'll try to get through them all. If I forget something that you raise, I'll try to cycle back and review them. Okay, so seeing your question, Dennis, about rendering. Let me just make a note. All right, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. So I think we'll have a pretty good discussion of some different questions that we had sent in. Okay, so we see Isaac from Illinois. It's great. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we'll wait one more minute and get started since we got a little bit of late start. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So we just had a question from Dennis on being able to name a track and region and then go to the next track to do the same. So maybe just make sure I'm not misunderstanding, but if you have a number of tracks that you want to name, I'll start off with an empty project here. And I'll go ahead and just add some audio tracks. So if you actually just kind of double click here, and if you do this kind of before the files are recorded, this can make your life a lot easier because this name will automatically be applied directly to the audio file that's going to be recorded. So if you double click in the name and you say just kind of randomly type in a name, then hit the tab key, you can now just immediately go to the naming field of the next track. So that will become active. You just type, hit tab, go to the next track, and you can see my creative typing here. And then that way, when you go to record, it will now assume the track names directly from the name here. So that's kind of a good tip to be able to navigate pretty quickly into naming fields, like especially if you get like a track sheet for a live concert, you could just simply just hit the tab key without having to double click, hit enter. So just kind of hit the tab key, and that will take you directly to the next field and have that selected. And then you could just enter in the text and the track names just kind of that easily. So when we come, so some of the questions we had, kind of an interesting question that someone had emailed me was in working with this. Let me just refer to the question. When they're dropping in markers that they wanted to kind of snap to the beginning of a bar, and as they kind of are dropping markers in, that it's sometimes a little bit late or a little bit early in anticipation. So what we could do here when working with markers, one of the things that you actually want to do is to just quickly assign a marker track. So I'm going to come here and we're going to right click. And I get this question a lot where kind of after every Hangout, where I right click and someone sees my extended toolbox, and their toolbox may look something like this by default. So if you wanted to change or toggle the behavior, one is you could just hit the control key as you right mouse click, but you could also just, if you go to your preferences and under tools, there's you could uncheck pop-up toolbox on right click. This is active by default. So if I just kind of leave that checked or unchecked, we can change kind of the status of the behavior. So I'm going to add a marker track. And when we go to add our marker track here, and we adjust the microphone just a little bit, we can put the markers in a number of different ways. One is, you could actually kind of see your marker here. And if you wanted to, just be able to kind of drop markers at will. But let's say if you're kind of playing your song on the Windows platform, you could just hit the insert key. So as you're playing along, hit the insert key. And you could also just kind of click right here on the track name itself to drop markers in. So let's say if we want a beginning of bar 9, and let's say that these aren't quite lining up to the grid that we want. So what you could do is actually just kind of, as soon as you have snap turned on, you can now just immediately just kind of select the marker and then just kind of move it, and it will snap directly to the grid that way. So if you say, okay, I want this marker right here, as soon as snap is turned on, you could just move it and have that snap to the grid. Now, if you wanted to actually have more descriptive parts of the marker, you can now come directly here into your description and say, okay, this is intro. And as we just kind of go back, you can just simply rename the markers and you can say verse. And then looking at, let's say, pre-chorus or whatever that you want to, or let's say this is now the solo. So there's two different marker types that you can have. So you can have not only kind of traditional locator markers, but you could have cycle markers. So if you wanted to just kind of grab even just a region like this while in the marker track, kind of towards the top of the marker track, you could actually, while holding down control key, you could actually just drop in markers just like that. And these cycle markers could actually be used like if you're comping a little part or a solo over and over and over again, you could just simply cycle based on the markers directly there. So if you just come here and also just kind of double clicking on a cycle marker, you'll notice that the left and right locators could then automatically be placed directly based on that cycle marker. Now, one of the things that's kind of handy since version 8.5 is the ability to actually kind of just turn off the locators, left and right locators, if it's going to cycle or not, just by clicking right in the cycle range where you see it turn into a hand. So where you see it kind of turn into like a little compass that allows you to zoom, and clicking directly above that will allow you to activate and deactivate the markers just like that. So if you want then to snap, and snap allows you to kind of have things based on a grid, and this grid could be based directly on your master time frame here. So if you want to see it snap to, you could right click in this region if you want to see it snap to seconds or to empty time code in different frames. So if I have it to bars, and if I have my snap turned off, I could just kind of freely move the marker anywhere in the time frame. So if I want it to be a little early or a little after, we could easily do that. But if I have my snap turned on and I move it at that point, you could just have it immediately lined directly up to the grid. So if you kind of take a little time and work with markers, you can navigate on a transport bar directly here to your different markers as well. And if you wanted to see kind of your description, you could also just kind of leave this window open to kind of type in different marker values. So it makes navigating around a project a lot easier when using markers. All right, so let me just come back here. We'll go to my notes and we'll look at our next topic. Dennis, did that answer your question on naming tracks? Was that what you intended or wanted to see? If you could just leave a comment if I was off on that, just let me know. Okay, we had a question come up. Someone who was taking a lot of different MIDI events and kind of dragging them directly on top of each other. I think it was what they described was working with different drums. So I'm just going to start a new project, and I'll just open up a quick drum part here for let's say Groove Agent SE. All right, so when you come here, you can just say, you choose the SE version here, since everyone has this that comes with it. All right, and I'm just going to load up just a quick kit here from our acoustic agent, and let's just say, we'll just take this. And when we load this up, this will not only load up the kits, but different patterns. So if you're working with different drum programs, you know, even if it's something, you know, Easy Drummer or BFD, you know, a lot of times you can just kind of drag and drop MIDI files. Now, when you work with dragging and dropping MIDI files, there's a preference to be aware of. By default, it will, like when you see a MIDI file, it will try to automatically open it using like a general MIDI sound bank found in Hallian Sonic SE. But when I go to my preferences here, and you could actually see when you go to under your MIDI to MIDI files, you could actually, you know, when you automatically go to import a MIDI file, you could just have it set to MIDI tracks versus Hallian Sonic SE multi-timbral or instrument tracks. So that way you can kind of just drag and drop. So if I go to my pattern pad here, let me just load up the kit with the patterns this time. Sorry about that. So we see our different patterns here. So we could actually just kind of trigger these patterns. And like when we do this, we could have a number of patterns that will be kind of different levels of complexity. So now let's say if I just want to drop the tempo down a little bit here. And if I wanted to drag this directly onto my project window and say, okay, I want to start this, we can now have that MIDI event on our timeline. But if we decided to change that MIDI data, and let's say if I had a different pattern, this would automatically go directly over top of that event. And often what happens is they end up kind of being merged together. So both parts will play back simultaneously. And while that's kind of useful for, if you're doing step recording and you're kind of doing one voice for a string section, it may not be what you want to do for drum parts. So if you find yourself where you have kind of two different tracks that are overlapping each other, and let me just undo that. If you go to the bottom center, you could actually just choose to switch between the different MIDI events here. There's a little arrow that you'll notice, and that will allow you to switch between all the different MIDI layers. Now, if you say, okay, I definitely never want to see this one again, and this is the one that I choose to work with, you could just click on remove overlaps, and then you're going to have just that one single part. Now, if you actually did want to merge them a little more intelligently, so let's say if we come here and I have these two events, sometimes people also want to know how to merge two different tracks onto one MIDI part. So if you hold down the glue tool, so we'll select the glue tool here, and then I think it's just the Alt key, that will then merge both of the tracks together for you. So when working with different MIDI parts that you want to be able to toggle back and forth between different layers, look in the bottom center, and then you could toggle back and forth between the two and choose, or if you wanted to combine those two to layer, let's say, percussion parts in addition to the actual drum beat, you could do that quite simply. All right, good to see we have someone from Brazil. Thanks for checking in. And let me know if it's what I'm kind of explaining is not making sense, or if I'm leaving something out. Just leave a comment in the field. All right, so we had a couple of people had requested to listen to the new Simon Phillips drum set. And we released this about 2 weeks ago. Let me just open up a quick project with it so we can kind of get a handle on it. Now, Simon Phillips is a incredibly highly respected drummer, and he's kind of one of the few drummers who, just kind of has universal appeal in a lot of ways, because he can, straddle both, the rock genre and kind of jazz very, very well. I've seen him, he was the drummer for Toto for, I believe, 20 or 21 years. I've seen him perform with Toto. I've seen him perform with The Who. He's played with Jack Bruce, Michael Schenker, I believe. Also played with Judas Priest, and a lot of, very kind of hardcore jazz stuff. So he's kind of had a very long and varied career. Pete Townsend, he's done a lot of work with. But he's also an engineer himself. So one of the things that is really interesting is when you have the musician and the engineer who's kind of working on sampling his own drum kit. And he has he has kind of a bit of an unorthodox drum kit to start with. So you notice that we have 6 toms, and these are all recorded in Simon's studio. Even kind of a gong tom. We have octobans, all of his cymbals that you would kind of expect. And if you wanted to do different choke holds, you could just kind of set what actual MIDI controller would be the choke hold. So you see kind of 2 different kick drums. We have 3 snares, interestingly enough. So if you want to have your piccolo snare in addition to this, and this mimics what Simon's kit looks like. So you're going to have kind of, 6 toms, let's see, 6 cymbals. You got your China boy, a gong tom, octobans, 2 kicks, floor, 3 snares. And what's kind of really interesting is not only do we have Simon's kit, and this is 6 gigabytes of content, but you have patterns that he's performed as well. So we have different introductions that you can play. or if you want endings. But when we get into kind of the patterns here where we could actually just kind of play the actual pattern, you're going to have the 16 levels of complexity. So if you wanted to have your dynamics on this axis and your levels of complexity, and of course, if you want to just kind of watch the instrument here. So if you want it to be kind of very complex and soft, or simple and loud. And then you could also do stuff like, I want to come here and say every bar play a different level of complexity where it's just kind of varied. And every 4 bars we'll do just one of the random 4 drum fills. And this kind of can actually just follow the transport. So when you come here, you could just say, okay, I hit play in Cubase. And it will just automatically synchronize. Now, there's some unique things with the actual drum set themselves that are kind of interesting. So one, when you select the snare, you could actually select between different snare types. So you have 4 different snare types. Or if you wanted it without the snares on. And the same concept for the kick drum. So we come here, you could have, you know, your different kick drums. Now what's also interesting is this concept of having trigger notes. So a lot of times when you're working in productions, you may take an actual no, sorry about that. Okay, we'll just, I may want to kind of augment the sound of the drums with different samples. So you could actually come here and choose the kick, and now you could have different trigger types. So you say, okay, I want distortion. So if you wanted to blend that in, so you have all these different types of, or if you want it more like an 808 type of thing. And these kicks can be tuned. And you can just kind of cycle through. So a lot of times you may kind of find a sweet spot between those for the track. And you could do the same kind of trigger types with the snares as well. So you could choose your snare, click on the trigger. Now, something I've never really seen in any of the different drum machines is, you know, we have drum sample libraries. Is you have here, when we go to select, let's say our kick, you know, we can have a tremendous amount of control for tuning. You know, so if I wanted to come here and say, okay, let's just tune the kick really high or low. And then you also have, okay, I want this more into the overhead mics. We'll just turn this up a little bit so you can maybe hear it a little better. Or let's say more of the room dialed in. But now you could actually click on the overhead and the room and just say, okay, I want to go to my kick, but I want to tune the kick drum's room higher independently of the kick itself. So if you want a bright room, or let's say perhaps a darker sounding room. So you can kind of come here and say, okay, on this I wanted to have my room sound of my snare. So we'll select our room. We'll add more room just so you can hear it a little more. So you come here, we add more room, and I want a darker or brighter room for the snare so it cuts through the mix. So very, very comprehensive. So again, what you have is, you know, Simon Phillips actual drums. You got octobans, the full, you know, 6 rack toms, a floor tom, a gong tom, all cymbals, and 3 different snares. So you get, you know, 6 gigabytes of drum samples that work directly in Groove Agent 4 or the Groove Agent SE that comes directly with Cubase, so every Cubase user could have access to it. So I know in the US it sells for, I think, around $79.99 or $80 in the US, and it probably varies a little bit from country to country. But not only do you get all of the samples, but a number of different patterns of how Simon would approach songs. And he kind of, when he did the patterns, he actually thought about how he would, approaching a session and what songwriters and people writing songs and would use, as opposed to just kind of showing off chops. So really, really great library for Groove Agent SE, and everything I showed you works exactly the same in Groove Agent SE or the full Groove Agent, and you could have Simon Phillips kind of playing right along with you. So really fantastic library for that. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. We'll do some stuff with Chord Track. Okay, so we had a question on getting Chord Track to sync up with MIDI loops. Let me just read the question here that was asked. Okay, so ask for MIDI loops that sync with Chord Track. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at some different MIDI loops. So when I come here, we'll just now kind of, let's go directly over to some of our loops here. So say, okay, we've got loops and samples. And let's say I just wanted maybe a piano. So we'll just audition this here. Okay, so I'm going to add this piano part here, and I think we want this to be synchronized with our chord pads, with our chord track was the question. So I'll just kind of slide this over here, and we'll have this snap directly here. So I'm going to repeat this a couple times. And one of the great things that you could do to repeat is to actually just kind of drag. And one of the things that's new in 8.5 is you'll see this little center part on the right. You can now just kind of drag this over, and now you can, let me just solo this here. So I'm going to add a chord track. So we'll just kind of come right over here, and let's add our chord track. And then what I want to do is to actually come here to chords, and we want this to kind of follow the chords. So we'll say, boom. So I'm going to now just enter in. So if we listen to just our piano part, and I'll slow down the tempo here, just making something a little more appropriate. So now if I wanted to kind of just start this off, we can say, okay, I want this to be in the key of D. And you can see that the MIDI parts have changed here. And say I want this to be in G. Say to an A7. To an E minor. And then we'll just go resolve down to a D. So one of the tricks, if you want the MIDI parts to actually follow the chords, is when you go to the MIDI part, you just want to activate and open up the chords here, and then choose for it to, it'll probably default to off, but you just choose to follow the chords and scales. And as you would just come here, if we just zoom in on this particular part, we could just say, okay, you'll notice that as I change the chords, that the MIDI notes will just kind of change on the fly right along to perfectly match whatever chord we have for that particular MIDI event. So if that's, I just want to make sure if that's not what you want to see with the chord track and a MIDI loop, just let me know. Just leave a comment in the field, and then we could go over that again. But I think that's kind of what you meant by that. So, all right, going to take a look at next question that we had sent in. All right, so we had a question about quantizing like live multi-track drum performance. So let me just open up a quick project here. All right, so let's say we have a drum track here, and we're going to listen to our drums. I'll just go ahead and solo the drums, and let's put on the click track here. It's kind of what most drummers don't want you to do. So if we listen to the click and kind of the drums, we can hear sometimes the drums are a little early, a little late, especially kind of coming out of drum fills. Looks like we have a snare roll coming up. So we can see a lot of times, perhaps like on drum fills, you may have a great take, but maybe the drummer has sped up or slowed down our drum performance. The one thing that we want to do is to actually take all these tracks, and then you could right click and you could actually place them into a folder track. So if you just, first off thing you want to do is to move the selected tracks to its own folder track, because we're going to need to do some group editing. So what we want to do first is kind of find hit points for some of the key drums, and usually this will be like kick, snare, are going to be kind of the key ones, depending on the material. Like I listened to this, the hi-hat is kind of critical as well. So what I want to do is double click on an actual part here, and we can go into the sample editor, and I'm going to select hit points. So once I go to my hit points here, I'm going to set my threshold. And why we want to set the threshold is a lot of times you're going to have drums that bleed through. So you can see sometimes here, like if we listen to just this particular track, we not only have, especially with live drums, you're going to have tracks that are bleeding. You see the snare. So I want to set the threshold so that it just is kind of incorporating just kind of the kicks and not the drums bleeding through. So I'm going to do this for my kick track, and I'm going to go to my snare track here and kind of do the same exact thing. Like we see kind of the hi-hat initially coming here. So what I want to do is to just adjust the threshold to incorporate the drums, so just the intended drum or snare. And let's go to, let's say, our hi-hat mic, and we'll do the same concept here. Okay, so now that these are all in a folder, what we want to do is to enable group editing. So on the folder track, what we want to do is now just activate this icon here. And then now these elements will kind of all move as a single group. So what I want to do is kind of edit this. Now the problem is a lot of times when doing these types of edits without group editing, what happens is, I think I accidentally unplugged my audio interface. Give me just 1 second. So when we come here, what we want to do is to, as we play this, when we have, if we wanted to just kind of shift drums around, the problem that you run into when doing this is like if you move a snare around, you're going to hear the snare kind of coming through in other microphones. So let me just check my VST connections here real quick. So what we want to do is to kind of keep all the drums kind of locked together. So as we do this, what we want to do is go to the quantize panel. And as we go to the quantize, what we need to do is to actually, we open up kind of our main quantize panel. So you just kind of see it directly right over here. And we want to take our drums, and we could assign priorities. Now, Cubase will automatically kind of find our hit points for us for all the tracks. So I want to go to my snare, and then we're just going to put a couple stars here. Let's say 4 stars, and 3 on my hi-hat. So what we could do now is it's basically figuring out the priority of all the slices. So as we work with this, we can now just say, okay, we want to now slice the audio kind of based on these priorities of our kick, snare, and our hi-hat. And then we'll just, so now it's been sliced. And we have a couple of different options. One is you could quantize, which would actually kind of cut and reposition the individual slices here. But the problem is that could leave gaps. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and quantize this. And if we kind of zoom in, we can see that it's going to automatically leave gaps there. So as we do this, we can now choose to crossfade those events so that when you actually go, now everything will be kind of perfectly aligned to the grid that way. So you could also do different, quantization values here. So I chose 16th notes. You could also do groove quantizes from other tracks. But that way you could quantize all of your drums effectively right there from within that one single process, and that way you could tighten up drum fill. So if you have drummers that, are recordings that speed up and slow down a little too much for your liking, you have the capability of being able to actually kind of fix those drum fills so you don't have to kind of redo the take ad nauseum, driving everyone crazy. So just an easy way to kind of do some multi-track drum quantizing. All right, you can go to my notes here. And again, if you have questions, please feel free. I know we had some people joining us a little late. Please feel free to kind of ask your questions in the comments field. Hey, it's good to see Fred from Richmond online. All right, let me just, we had a question about touch automation. So I'm just going to do a new project here. All right, so I'm going to open up we'll just add a quick audio track here. All right, so the question was, and let me just kind of read it. All right, so the question was, I see about creating harmonies. We'll go into that in just a minute. When using kind of touch automation, about it, how it reverts to a value, or that when they go into touch automation, they expect it to kind of jump right back to where it was. So I'm going to just do a quick, I'm going to set my left locators. Let's say our song is 8 bars long here. I have an audio vent and this automation concept. will be applicable for MIDI and MIDI continuous controllers as well. Okay, so we'll get into some voice stuff here, seeing some questions. All right, so when we go to automate a parameter here, and the default automation mode will be touch. But this is kind of contingent on if there's actually existing automation in the event as well. So I'm just going to take another quick look at my audio interface here. Give me just 1 second. Just see if we can hear it here. Hang on, just see if I get a reset. Fell off my table here. Okay. All right, I just unplugged my USB port. I'm going to reset it here. Sorry about that. I have to restart my Cubase here real quick. Hang on, just gonna restart my Cubase just so I get my audio interface waking up here. Sorry about that. All right, let me just get my Cubase going here. You can see the great 3D effect here. All right. So I make sure you guys can hear what I'm doing. I'll try not to kick the audio interface again. All right, so we'll go back to our automation. I'll just do a quick empty project here. Okay, so the touch automation can be contingent upon actually having, just make sure we got our audio going on here. All right. All right, so, all right, sorry about loud click. All right, I'll adjust the volume here. Okay, so when we have an automation part, sorry about that, we can now, I'm just going to set this for a quick loop here. And we could kind of just set a loop point around the whole song. So when we go to touch automation, and I go to move the fader, that as soon as I do this, like, you know, what some people expect the automation to do is to, when they touch the fader, for it to immediately kind of go back to the previous value. But if there's no initial value there, so if we take this from the start, and let's say, okay, I just want to move this up just a little bit here. that they kind of, if from the very initial one, it may just stay at that value because there is no value. Now, going to the automation panel, you could, there's some handy things here, and you could hit F6 to open this. But for the very first time, let's say we'll just kind of take this from scratch. We could actually write the values in. You could do this for multiple tracks that are selected. So as soon as you just come here and just touch the fader, it'll now write that value in. So if you want to do like little automation bumps, you can now just kind of come here, move the automation up, and then as soon as you let go of the touch, it'll just immediately revert to kind of the previous automation value. But the very first time, you would need to have an automation value there. So if you just open up kind of the automation setup here, the automation panel, you could do it to loop for the whole song, or you could just choose to start and to end. So if you need an automation value initially to be written in, you could just say, okay, I want to start and end, and you can say boom, and that will write the value in for you as well. But for the first time, Cubase, if there's no automation value, Cubase won't necessarily have a value to return to because one hasn't been written in yet. But once you have kind of an automation, you could do that quickly with the to start or to end, or just a loop, and select multiple tracks, and you could just put it into quick link and keep the same value, touch one, then you have that initial automation value. All right, so we had some questions on Vari Audio. So let's go ahead and one about kind of some different cool effects, and for one for kind of creating harmonies. What's the best way of doing that? So we'll go ahead and open up project so we can take a look at that. Okay, so we'll take a look at this. So in this track, one of the things that we could do is kind of when working with different harmonies, or creating harmonies, or working with tuning. One of the things that's really handy is a lot of times you may just have like a MIDI track. Like in this example, I have a piano part that someone played in via MIDI, and we can look at it in our score as well. But now what I could do is right click, go to my chord track, and I'm going to choose create chord symbols. And what that's done is an actual analysis of the MIDI data here, so we can see what chords are being played. Now, so if we wanted to listen to this, I'm going to make sure I don't kill everyone volume-wise. Just check my outputs one more time. Okay, I think we should. So now I have my chords here. So if I wanted to kind of just alter the voice, there's a number of ways of doing that. If you're looking for kind of the classic, very processed, auto-tune-esque, or, like from Cher's Believe, one of the plugins that you can have is just by coming over here and under pitch shift, you could have pitch correct as a plugin. So if you open this up, and what you could do is, you could actually kind of set the key here. So it looks like this determined we're in the key of G. So I could actually kind of set the key here. So I could say we're in G major. And we could tell this kind of by the actual chord track analysis. So if you wanted to do some, pitch shifting. Now, if you adjust kind of the speed up and the tolerance, So there's a lot of people that are kind of looking for that sound as kind of a special effect. So that's handy, quick, and easy just to do that. Now within the Very Audio editor, what's really handy, so to get to the Very Audio editor, what you want to do is to actually just double click on the part from the project window, and then that'll open you into the sample editor, and you'll see the Very Audio editor. Click here on the pitch and warp, and that will do an analysis of your vocal. Now, as we do this, what we can see, we can actually kind of, interestingly enough, colorize based on the chord track. So once we have this selected, so I could have it by the event, which would be the color from our project window, or each pitch could be its own color, or you could actually just choose to colorize via the chord track. So a green note means that it's within the chord, a blue note means it's within the scale or key, and a red note is out of key. So if you wanted to just come here, and we'll listen to it with the backing tracks here. So if I move this to a red note, as you see here, you see that probably wouldn't sound as good as a green note that's here. Now, if I wanted this note to actually last longer, you could just stretch it here. So let's say if we don't want to sound like she's taking a breath, you could just stretch that note. Now, you can also just kind of come here, select an entire phrase, and you could quantize the pitch, which would kind of move it to the nearest note. But you could also, if you're going for that effect that we had heard before, I could also just kind of take particular phrases here, and I could just straighten the pitch. And sometimes, you know, if someone has a really really wide vibrato that you need to tame, you know, you could just kind of do that on a note by note basis. If you're going for the effect, and of course, you could undo all those changes. Now, let's say this last phrase here. So if I wanted to add harmonies, one, it's going to be ideal that you go into the Very Audio and do the pitch and warp analysis directly in the file itself. And if you have the chords here from the chord track, so if we kind of blow this up a little bit, we can see, like here we have a C9 going to a G chord. And if I wanted to just kind of, I'm going to select a range here of these notes. And I'm going to just, and we listen to that range. So if I wanted to add harmonies to that, we can now just go to generate harmony voices. I'll say give me 2 harmonies, and we're going to have a soprano and an alto. But if you wanted to actually kind of change, let's say I wanted a tenor, you could just choose to go to the chords here and say give me a tenor voice instead. And we'll just kind of bring the volume down here a little bit. And it's actually kind of copied over like the EQ and the plugin settings as well. So and that's really all you have to do to create the harmonies. Now, if you wanted to edit the harmony voices, and this is something I saw we had another question on, is that people thought that they could only edit one part at a time, and like, oh, if I could only edit multiple parts. All you have to do is select the 3 parts here, hit the enter key, and now you could just simply toggle back and forth. You could activate one voice kind of at a time. So if I wanted to change the harmonies, I could just listen to this. And again, if you go to like green notes, you know that those harmonies will work. And I can say, okay, let's move this note to here, see what that sounds like. And say, okay, maybe I want to keep it the lead vocal up top there. And you can know kind of based on the colors that you could just simply move the different notes around here. So that way you could actually see, you know, and it doesn't have to be just created harmony parts. It could be just selecting 4 or 5 tracks of, you know, a background vocal, select them, hit enter, and then you could do all of your very audio editing where you could see all the different harmonies in one edit screen, which is incredibly handy. So I think that answers the questions we had on the on most of the very audio stuff. I'll just cycle back and see. Okay, so we had a question on adding and editing karaoke data in the MIDI. So yeah, you could do this. It's often done in the MIDI list editor. So I think this may not be in all the kind of the lighter versions, but when we have MIDI editing, you know, we have kind of, you know, this is a very traditional piano roll editor. We could also look at our parts for MIDI. You know, we have dedicated drum editor if you wanted that, or if you wanted to look at it in the score editor. One of the first early MIDI editors is going to be a list editor. And sometimes this looks a little, can be a little anachronistic and intimidating for people. But this is an actual list of all the events that occur in the particular, you know, in the particular track. So sometimes if you have a MIDI controller that's, you know, like something is just kind of weird in your MIDI part, you could actually just kind of find it very easily here in your list editor. So if we wanted to insert data, let me just see if this is. And this is where you could actually see kind of all, I don't have my MIDI data here, but let's say if I just wanted to, and at this point, this is where you could see kind of your standard MIDI file. Karaoke commands would just kind of show up here. Trying to remember how to enter them in if you wanted to, but you're able to, I think, if you just kind of, let me just come here and just click on the controller. But kind of, so, but all of your karaoke information will just show up here directly in the list editor as well. So a lot of times you may open up, I'll just show you one project that has some additional metadata as MIDI parts here from a MIDI file. It's not karaoke stuff, but you'll get the idea here. So just find this, just open up this project. Okay, so when I actually, I'll just kind of select all these events here in this project. And then when you go into the list editor, I'll just kind of go, I think some of these might have had, see if I could find any of the parts here. May not, just see if I just select this track and let me just go to try this track, see if there's any of the Yeah, I'm not seeing any here. I may have deleted it, but that's where you would kind of see all the different karaoke functions is going to be edited and entered in the list editor itself. All right, so go to next question. All right, so we had a question. What if I'll read it to you. How do I tempo a song if I don't start out with a tempo and the drum loop and the beat from scratch doesn't match 120 beats a minute? So we'll get into some audio warp. Let me just cycle back here so I can see comments. Okay, so we'll just kind of start a new project here. Okay, so I'm just going to open up my media bay here, which I have a lot of different drum loops. All right, so let's say I just want to find... All right, so let's say I have this drum loop and I want to do a song based on that drum loop. So I'm just going to drag it out here. But let's say now our tempo isn't quite aligned up. So if I play my click track, so there's a number of different ways you could actually kind of come here and, you know, if you wanted to, a lot of times you could actually see kind of the name directly in the drum loop is often. Now, if you wanted to come here, you could also just quickly do a tempo detection of that drum loop, and then you could see that it's automatically figured it out that it's going to be basically 97 beats a minute here. So slightly off. Now, one of the things that you could do if you wanted to work with this, so you could determine a tempo, but if you want it, I think if you actually go from, and there's a couple ways, and there's different generations of this, so let me just find one function here real quick. Might be under. So one of the clever ways to do this is you could automatically place, a lot of times the audio file itself will have metadata in it. And if it doesn't have metadata, you know, when you actually go to, let's say, the pool menu, a lot of times when you record audio, it's going to automatically be placed directly. So we can see that, you know, this is recorded at a tempo of 97 beats a minute. And you see this little checkbox here for musical mode. Now, you could also access this checkbox directly from, so I'm going to select the event, and if I place this into musical mode, we can now have this automatically follow kind of whatever tempo our transport is set to. So originally it was at 97 beats a minute for this particular track. So you notice that as I adjust the tempo here, that the display didn't change. But now that it's in musical mode, it'll just automatically, as I adjust new tempo values, just kind of so whatever tempo I have, it'll just automatically kind of be almost like a tempo parasite to the tempo. So once you kind of put something into musical mode, and there's, let me just see if I remember, it's kind of an older way. Let me see if I can find it real quick. where you could kind of, you know, do it for loops, but it's like super easy just to kind of do, just to select the event, and from the project menu just kind of do. But there's also here a beat calculator. So if I take this out of musical mode, I could actually listen to the drum loop here. So let's just listen to it. I'll take off my click, and you could actually just kind of count. So say 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. All right, so it's 16 beats. So if you come here, you could go to your beat calculator and say how many beats was that, and you just type in 16, and then you could automatically place that, and you could at that point just simply type in the number of beats, and at that point it would just automatically calculate the tempo for you, and then you could use that as the basis for a song. Now if you have kind of an existing project here, one of the cool things you could do is, let's say I just have a live band and I wanted a loop to follow the live performance. So I'll come here and we'll find kind of a jazz piece, and let's do a remix of this jazz piece. So we kind of start off here. Okay. So what I want to do, I'm just going to use, let's say, the drum overheads here. And there's a question that just kind of came in. How do you assign it to be 4/4? Because it kind of figures out where the beats are. So when I come here, we want to go to Project, to Tempo Detection. So I'm going to select my overheads here. And have it do its tempo analysis. Now it's figuring out exactly where every beat falls. So I turn on my click track. So it's created a time signature track. And I'll just move this to the top here real quick. And it's created a tempo track. Now again, it's figuring out kind of exactly where every beat is. So it places it by default, and it's going to be a little awkward sometimes, as a 1/4 bar. So I see a 1/4 bar here. So what I want to do is say the downbeat is right here. So once you're in the signature track, select the pencil tool, right? So we're just going to continue here and close that out. And what we want to do is right there, we want to put in, just make sure it's the right area here. Yeah. Just going to erase that value here. All right. So I'm just going to listen for the downbeat of the drums. All right. So it's right here. So then what I want to do is, and you could actually just turn the snap on, select the pencil tool, the draw tool here, and just say 4/4. So once we've done that now, so now we have our tempo here. So as we're kind of playing along. So if I wanted to add a drum loop, and we'll do something just highly inappropriate here, we just find maybe kind of like an R&B or electronic. So what I want to do is I'm going to place this drum loop kind of on our timeline. And what we could do is, since we kind of have the actual, and we're just going to start it right here on the downbeat. And then I'm going to place that into musical mode. And let's copy it a bunch of times here. And what this will do is this loop is going to speed up and slow down to match the tempo of the original track. So as we kind of go on our song. So at that point, any drum loop that you throw in will just kind of automatically follow that particular. So if I want to take this drum loop and drop it right in on the downbeat here, I could just, again, that will just speed up. To automatically follow the tempo of the live musicians in this case. So it gets to be an incredibly powerful tool for working with that. And now once you have the tempo, you could have like your tempo based effects, like your delays, and you could set them to sync to the tempo. So you could have a quarter note delay that will remain synchronized regardless of what the tempo is. So some great things to have your tracks kind of, you know, get a really polished sound if you want to. But the tempo detection and getting kind of loops to fit in, very powerful aspect of Cubase. And it does it with like really great sonic fidelity, so you don't have to sit there and, you know, spend 8 hours correcting stuff to try to get it to sound how it originally did. So it's using in 8.5 the latest Elastique algorithm version 3, so you have really great sound. All right, then we look through some other questions. Does that make sense? Is that pretty cool? All right, so just reading through some questions that were sent in. Okay, so we had a question on like if we have, let's say, a part of a recording that was like really, you know, like maybe it was kind of just a jam thing and the record head was, you know, you're just kind of recording the whole time just in case you captured some magic, and you captured some magic out of, let's say, a large audio recording here. And how can you kind of easily just kind of cut those parts if there's a way? Obviously, we can grab the scissors tool and split events and move events. But another way of doing this is just kind of using the range tool. So if I just wanted to select with the range tool, and now I could just kind of even just drag that out and come up with some other parts without having to take an extra 2 or 3 mouse clicks and switching tools back and forth. And you could do this for multiple parts. And go, oh, the drums are really cool here. I want to use that as the foundation for a new song. So kind of using the range tool, you could do a lot of nifty editing like that. So if you have song, you know, files that are been going on for a long time, and all of a sudden, you know, you just want to take just a portion where there's a little something interesting without having to go crazy with different files, you can just kind of very easily select with the range tool and kind of treat that as its own separate entity that quickly. All right, so we had a question. So actually, someone called this question in on how to monitor with effects during recording. You know, so when we're kind of using a native based system, you know, there's different ways of working with latency. So you could monitor with effects, or sometimes you see direct monitoring, and sometimes some interfaces will have onboard DSP. So, or people that want to apply an effect plugin, such as a compressor or maybe an amp simulator on input. So there's some confusion there. We get this question a bit. So when you go into your devices menu and go to your device setup, depending on your audio interface, so if I go here to my VST audio system, here you could select your ASIO driver for your device. And then if I wanted to just kind of go here, Once you select the device, you could have it externally clocked if you have that set up, and you can set the clock source from other devices depending on digital inputs and BNC connections. But there's also direct monitoring. So what direct monitoring will allow you to do is, if you're tracking, and let's say you have a singer, and we've all kind of have probably put on a reverb as a send, and the singer's singing, and while they're recording, they're hearing kind of a weird delay. And that delay is kind of set by the buffer size of the audio interface, and a combination of that and the processing time that that plugin takes. So here I'm running a 256 sample buffer, so my latency is around 11.5 milliseconds. So for a lot of singers, that's fine, and we could obviously go lower than that if needed. But a lot of times we could actually have a direct monitoring system. So if you run a lower latency, that means that the computer has to work harder to get that audio information out to your audio interface. So while it decreases the latency, the computer has to work a lot harder to get that. So some interfaces would allow you to do direct monitoring. Now, sometimes you have the checkbox here and the interface doesn't handle it. So what direct monitoring allows you to do is to actually take the input signal, send it directly to the output, and be able to monitor directly off of the output. So when kind of working with that, that's fine, except you're not going to hear any of the software effects. So if I have a reverb here as a send or an insert, you're not going to be able to actually hear that reverb because the signal is going directly from the input to the output. Now, so if you want to hear effects and you're not hearing them and you see them here, you could actually just simply, again, go to your device setup, select under VST audio system, and make sure that direct monitoring is turned off, and then you can monitor with effects. So if you're monitoring with effects, you may want to adjust the latency lower, making your computer work harder so that it'll be processed so that the delay compounded between the latency and the effect plugin itself isn't so disconcerting for the performer. So working with this, so if you expect to hear the effects and you don't, turn off direct monitoring. Now, Cubase also has, depending on your connections that you have defined, we can go to the VST connections and we can have inputs. So there's a number of different inputs that we could look at in our software mixer. So, and we see our inputs as red channels here. So if I wanted to actually apply and have like an insert effect here, let's say if I wanted to have a compressor, we can now just kind of come over here, let's say even a multi-band compressor, you could now record and that input signal will get processed through the plugin, and that plugin is applied to the recording. So that's if you want the effect applied to the recording, you could apply it on the input stage. But this could increase the chance of kind of monitoring issues with the musician with latency. Now, some audio interfaces like the Steinberg UR series, so from the UR242 to UR44, the 28M, and also the UR824, we have kind of built-in DSP here. So we could actually just choose to have onboard effects. So I have my UR44, and this has effects built in already. So I could actually just kind of, when I go to my racks, I'm going to choose to, I need to assign first just an input here on my VST connections to my UR44. And this is, what's kind of unique about this is sometimes you have onboard DSP with audio interfaces and they run into the issue of when you're working with it that you have to always kind of go to a separate program. So I'm just going to set an input here. Let's say I want my first input going to input 3. So now when I go to my mixer, you can actually have a hardware tab that can show up. Enable that, and now what you could do is with the UR44 you could actually have a couple of different effects as inserts. So you could have a channel strip, you could have also 4 different types of guitar amps. So if I wanted to actually come here, we could say, okay, I wanted a morphing channel strip, which is a combination of EQ and dynamics. And I could also have a built-in reverb with this end. So these plugins can actually be processed in real time without perceived latency because it has the DSP on it. Now, something to be aware of when you come here, and if you're adjusting, let's say your guitar amp, and you wanted to actually record, now you can choose to bypass the effect there, or you could choose to have your plugin monitored. But if I wanted to record directly through this guitar amp, I could just move this signal down here, and as I record, the signal is recorded without perceived latency directly into the input channel. So this way, if you wanted to track your microphone with compression, you could just kind of go here to your channel strip, and then you could have compression on your input without attracting any additional latency issues. So if you want to, so the Steinberg UR242 and higher will always allow you to have the onboard DSP, so you can monitor with effects without any perceived latency. Other interfaces, you may be able to have to kind of toggle back and forth to a different program to do that and not really be able to save it within the project. So the integration is really nice. Plus, you can have the ability to record with the input, record with the plugin on the input stream by putting on an input channel. If you want to monitor with effects but not apply them, make sure that direct monitoring is turned on. And if someone is complaining about a delay within the signal while they're recording, activate direct monitoring, and those situations should be able to help you out with that. Okay. And once again, if you have questions, I'm just going to kind of cycle back, see if there's questions that were asked, and we could kind of go back through. I'll go back to the list of questions that were sent in. Okay, so we had a kind of interesting question about if there's the ability to, if someone had come in before an audio punch in, and that part wasn't captured in the punch. Is there a way to kind of get that audio recorded? So sometimes, like, someone may come in a little bit early, or they just played the most amazing part before the punch in, and you want to be able to capture that. We'll start with a new project here. And I'm just going to place we'll just add a quick audio track, and I'm going to add just on its input channel, just an effect, just a quick test tone plug-in. So just open up my mixer here. Okay, so let's just kind of bring this down. So the test tone plugin is handy for a lot of different testing needs. So if I wanted to come here, we can now just set the input. And let me just see, let me just check my connections here real quick. Okay, so let's say we're coming in on our snare input here, Okay, so we have just a little bit of a test tone. All right, so I'll just turn off the monitoring. So let's say we have a punch in here and a punch out. All right, so one of the preferences that you have here, take a quick look at it here, during recording, is you could actually set kind of your pre-record. So let's say, and I think you could go up to a minute on this. So let's say we'll just go 2 seconds. And then what I want to do is just kind of do a quick punch in and punch out. All right. So now if you wanted to, let me just set this up one more time here. I'm going to activate my punch in. So let me just set up one more way here. So let's say we'll just start recording here. And now at this point, you realize that someone played like the most amazing part just earlier. You can now just simply roll that back 2 seconds. So depending on where you start recording, so let's say we're here, and from that input source, we'll just turn off the monitoring. At this point, just simply take the left locator and you could roll it back 2 seconds. So if someone played a pickup note that was kind of unintended, that sounded really cool, and you just kind of wanted to roll back, just have that audio pre-record, and then at that point you could just simply roll right back and be able to kind of have other parts that maybe while you weren't in record were still kind of in the record buffer. So it's a really handy feature. Someone just saying like a great vocal pickup line, you're like, oh, I just punched in right at, after that, you can now just simply roll back and have that part captured. All right, so just going to so we're seeing a question: will we be able to export projects from Cubase to Cubasis for editing on the fly? It could be kind of brought back in. I haven't heard of any plans for that, but I could definitely pass it on. I think what a lot of people would do is kind of take that audio track and maybe make kind of stem files out of it, but I think that's an interesting kind of workflow scenario as well. So I'll mention that to our development team and marketing people to see if there's any problems with that, but I'll pass that on. All right, let me just kind of cycle back and let me just look through some of our questions that were mailed in. All right, so we had a kind of interesting question when using a lot of virtual instruments. Sometimes it was getting a little confusing, sometimes with naming conventions. So let's say, and this could be with any virtual instrument, but let's say if I add a couple of rack instruments here, so let's say I have a Hallian Sonic SE here, and let's say here I have like drums, bass, and piano, or kind of rhythm section, and then maybe another one I have it kind of set up for different synthesizers. And we'll add one more here. And let's say this is strings and stuff like that. So, but sometimes when you go to your MIDI ports, you could then just see Hallian Sonic, SE, MIDI, Hallian Sonic, number 2, Hallian Sonic, number 3, Hallian Sonic. So if you want it to be a little more descriptive, all you have to do, and sometimes we see people using like different sample libraries like, Hallian or Contact, and they have, just 12 instances of Hallian, so it could be a little confusing. But if you come directly to the name here and just double click, we could just kind of type and rename this as like rhythm section. And let's say I want this to be keys and synths. And I want this to be orchestral. So now when I go to my MIDI ports, as you look at your MIDI ports, you could actually just kind of see rhythm section, keys and synths, orchestral. So it's a little more descriptive based on what is actually in each instrument. So you don't have to see, Contact, written 48 times as your output port, or Hallian Sonic. So that's just a really handy tip for being able to kind of overcome that problem that people have run into. All right, go back, look at another question here. All right, so we had a question on, sometimes people will say, okay, Cubase doesn't come with a traditional sampler. How can I spread samples across different drum pads? Or not necessarily just drum pads, but how can I play a sample and have it show up, where I could play it from a MIDI keyboard? So let me just open up a particular project here, which is kind of set up for this. And we can do this with Groove Agent SE. Let's see if it's the right project here. All right, so I'm going to start with so someone basically wants to take a sample and be able to kind of play it very easily. So I'm going to add just in this example, I have a bunch of Groove Agents, but I'm just going to add a Groove Agent SE here because this is what everyone has and what the question was about. All right, so let's say I have a track that just has like one single monophonic note here, or it doesn't have to be monophonic, but let's say like a bass sample. Okay, so this track here, I have my bass sample, and I want to open up. And one of the great things with Groove Agent is, it's incredibly flexible. So this is an E note. So what I want to do is to actually just drag it onto a pad. So now I could just trigger that note directly from the pad here. And if you wanted to, get to the point where you wanted to just kind of trim the beginning or the end, you'll be able to. So I have this note here. And you could actually go to the pitch tab right here. And you can set a key range. So I'm going to say I want E1 through E3. And now we could actually, one of the things you could do is come over here and we'll put it into solo mode for audio warp, so it would be kind of the same length. So now, as I wanted to just select or play different notes, so I can say, okay, I wanted this E note here. And now you could just kind of play that from any MIDI keyboard itself. So you could, easily you could just kind of take any kind of pitched based audio if you wanted to just kind of trigger it from different MIDI notes and spread it across. So once again, come here, drag it onto a pad, select the original pad, make sure you're on instrument to edit, select the pitch, activate key range, set your key range, and it probably would make sense if you sometimes when if you go up 2 octaves, your note gets to be 1/4 as long. At that point you could just activate the audio warp to solo, and then you'd be able to kind of just play that as any sample. So if you have someone that's saying, one note, you could then just kind of play that and trigger it in the MIDI domain and sequence directly from that and make your own samples that quickly. All right, let's go back to some more questions that were sent in. All right, so we had a question that someone was working in 5.1 surround sound for the first time, and they had created a 5.1 channel, and at that point realized that they couldn't, that the panning wasn't working as expected. So let's just create kind of this scenario here. So I'm going to do a new project. And what we want to do is we'll just choose to, I'm going to add, let's say, a number of tracks. These could be mono, stereo. And I want to add a track here. And let's create a 5.1 track, okay? And then what you want to do when you're working with 5.1 is to actually create a 5.1 output to start with. So we go to the VST connections, and on our outputs, I'm just going to get rid of this. And I'm going to add a 5.1 output. Okay. And I want to make sure that all these tracks are now assigned to that 5.1 output. So I'm going to hold down Alt plus Shift. And now that all the tracks are selected, they're now all routed to the same destination. You can do that for a lot of different elements. So when going into, what this person was actually doing was they're creating a 5.1 channel, and when they went to edit the 5.1 channel, that the panner wasn't working the way they thought. So they're expecting kind of the cool surround panner there. So if you have a 5.1 channel, it's already kind of being bussed directly out to the 5.1 outputs. So what you need to make sure is happening is that when you go to your actual audio channel here, that now when you double click, that now you could route this signal anywhere in your 5.1 domain. So you take a stereo or mono track and then mix that directly into your 5.1 source. So, if you have a 5.1 channel going out to a 5.1 output, it's basically just going to be fixed that way. Now, something to be aware of when you're working with this is that when you deal with effects, you may want your effect to actually be in 5.1 as well. So when you go to add an effects channel track, you actually have the choice of saying, okay, I want, and what's interesting is all the Steinberg plugins that come with Cubase are VST3, and that's going to allow you to actually have 5.1 setup. So if I want to go to my reference here, I could now create my 5.1 effect send. And so when I go to my channels here, my reverb can actually be working in full surround sound as well. So if you get the chance to kind of play around with doing some surround mixing, it's obviously used in films, and now you see it in a lot of games. There used to be a lot of music projects that were being kind of remixed from classic stereo mixes into 5.1, which is really exciting. But I think once you kind of play around with it, it's really a lot of fun and very engaging because you have a lot more kind of space to work with. So if you get a chance to play around with some surround stuff, it's definitely worth exploring, just even, for sheer fun and joy of it. Okay. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the comments field. I think we have a couple more questions we'll get to. Okay, so someone had asked, when they have an audio channel with a lot of inserts, how can they easily open up all of those inserts? So let's say if I go to this channel and I have a number of available inserts here, say a delay, let's say an EQ, let's do a filter, and let's say it's maybe like a vintage compressor. So if I have 4 different plugins, what the person was looking for is a way where they wouldn't have to necessarily double click on each of these plugins to see their user interface. So there's always great little handy shortcuts that you can do in Cubase. So we can see the edit key here, and that will bring up like your channel settings. But if you hold down the Alt and Shift key, let me just check, Alt and Shift, and click on the edit key, that will open up all the insert plugins that are assigned to that particular channel. Control plus Shift on that same button will close them all. So Alt plus Shift and Control plus Shift will just simply allow you to view all the inserts on that particular track or to close. So Alt plus Shift opens and Control plus Shift will close. All right, so you see Frog X, he's going to be heading off. And Frog X is always incredibly generous and doing kind of different indexes. So I just wanted to thank him for that. He always does such a great job of indexing all the topics that we cover. He takes the time to go through them all. Okay, so Sir Robert, good to see you online here. So he's asking, what's the best way to patch in hardware inserts, reverbs, and compressors into your setup? So Cubase and Nuendo can freely work with hardware devices just the same way. So if we go to your connections, your VST connections, and we want to use an actual hardware piece, what we could do is just go to the external effects tab. So let's say I have a distressor. So what I want to do is just to add an external effect here, and you could give it a name. We'll call it a distressor. And we could choose, okay, this is going to be a mono in, mono out for this, and then hit OK. Now, once you have this added here, what you do is we can connect it into your audio interface. So we can say, okay, I want this into inputs 4 and output 4 and input 4. And that's where my hardware is just physically connected. Now to access my distressor, I could now go over here to my inserts, and then we'll see external plugins. And then you can now just open it up, and now the signal will get routed directly out to your distressor. Now, one thing to be aware of is sometimes, especially sometimes with older reverb units and delay units, sometimes by the time the signal goes out from the computer through the audio interface into the hardware, gets processed in the hardware, and kind of does the opposite path to return the signal, that one of the things that you might have to do is sometimes you may notice that that's going to cause a bit of delay. For the most part, it's going to be pretty low, but if you want to be really precise about it, you could actually just click on this button here once you open up the editor, and then at that point you could just click there, and that will ping the system. And as it pings the system, you could automatically do all the delay compensation, have that handled for you, so that as you're pinging the system, it will automatically have your hardware perfectly in time with the rest of your session as well. So it was a super handy feature. So we have lots of people that just have a lot of inputs and outputs on the Dante or MIDI based system, and will just simply use it to incorporate all of their outboard gear directly into their Cubase setup without the need for having to use a traditional console for that. So once again, go to your VST connections, and external effects, add the external effect, do the routing. It will then show up under external plugins, and just choose it right there. All right, we had a question about panning the effect send of a particular channel. So let me just come over here. We'll just jump back to one of the projects that we were on earlier. And this is kind of a common trick, that people have been doing for a long time, especially maybe in bands where there's a couple, like 2 different guitar players, where you have the guitar panned in one channel, and maybe the actual reverb or delay of the guitar panned in the opposite channel, so to kind of make it sound a little bigger. But if we wanted to actually kind of play back, and let's say we'll take our lead vocal here, and we listen to this with our reverb on. We just play this a little bit. So when we go to open up the channel view, so afraid to smile. So I'm going to just select this, and I'll go to my channel view here. So we can see that we have our sends, but if you actually just go to the panning here, so we can see our destination and our panning. So now I could just take the vocal, even though it's panned in the center, and I could just pan the reverb to only one side or the opposite side. Or if you want the reverb panned in the center. So it's a really handy trick. So a lot of times in the 80s, it was kind of a classic. You have a lot of rock bands that had 2 guitar players. So one guitar is panned all the way to one side, but the reverb's in the opposite side, and this just the opposite with the other guitar player, and it kind of could make for a very kind of thick sound. But very easy just to, when you want to pan the different effect sends, to come here so you'll by default see the destination, and then each stereo effect could also just kind of come right over here and be panned independently on every single channel. All right, let's go take a quick look at, we have a couple other questions that were sent in. All All right, so we had a question on Media Bay about applying tags in Media Bay. So we want to come over here. Now Media Bay can do a tremendous amount of, it's a very comprehensive system for kind of being able to find and search out for different sounds. Now, one of the things that we could actually do is, be able to search for different items by just kind of tagging them. So let's say if I wanted to tag a bunch of audio files, let's say I have these audio files and I wanted to apply some metadata to them. So when you actually if you don't see kind of the actual like directory tree, if you go to the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the setup window. So, here you could search for all these different tracks. And now, if you wanted to hide the directory tree or show that, but there's also an attribute editor. So if I wanted to just select all these tracks, at this point you could actually say, okay, I wanted to come here, and you could actually just kind of have different ideas here, but you could actually have different attributes as well. So if I wanted to add attributes, let's say, okay, I wanted to say this was on, this particular album or whatever. So you could actually kind of come here and say, okay, I want to find the artist. So now I'm going to have this. So once I've added that, it's now shows up directly here, so you can see the artist. So if I say, okay, this artist was named Brian, and we'll just call him Jones. So I'm just going to double click here. So now that metadata has been applied to all of the files. So if I was actually now looking for a particular, I could actually just search based on that metadata. So I type in Jones. Now all those names will just kind of show directly up there. So it allows you to kind of easily kind of pick. And what's interesting is not only can you choose kind of your different categories here, but you could actually create your own categories. So if you're looking for a particular, I'm looking for a swoosh sound effect on bass, that I didn't use on this record. So you could actually kind of search for your own user attributes and create those attributes as well. So if you have like a large sample library or a lot of different loops and different drum files, you could just simply search and kind of organize your library so you could find, particular files very quickly without having to, wade through tens of thousands of different audio files. So if you take a little time and do some tagging, if you have like special hierarchies for folders, stuff like that, you could do it very easily within the Media Bay. All right, so we have someone from Iran. It's great to see. I'm not sure if we've had someone from Iran on before. So it's, I think I've gone through the questions that I had sent in. Are there any more questions that people watching have before we kind of wrap up the meeting tonight? And once again, this will be kind of this will be available to watch online shortly after. So if you wanted to go back and watch it, and I know people have been like FrogX has been incredibly generous in posting kind of a detailed synopsis of the different topics covered and at what time. But if a couple people want to do that, that's always super helpful. So if you go, okay, I want to learn about Media Bay, I could jump to 2 hours, or I want to learn about panning, effects ends, or this trick. So, but we'll just see if people have questions here as before we wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of the Google Hangout, and we appreciate it. And it's we hope everyone learned a couple of things. And if you have any quick questions before we wrap up. So I see a question, is there any way to make the side chain signal look ahead? You might be able to from the original track. What you might be able, if you needed to do a side chain that was ahead, you might be able to duplicate a track. And I know some people do this for different compressors, for different effects. But I'm going to right click here and choose to, we'll just duplicate the track here. And what you could do is once you have this selected here, you could actually just kind of by milliseconds have this track delayed like earlier or later in time. So maybe as opposed, and this is by millisecond here, you could also adjust kind of the input point, and if you have your main time set to, even as far as samples, you could just simply have this event occur at samples earlier and then use that as a sidechain input. So I haven't tried that, but I think that should do the trick. If not, you could always nudge this track earlier, and then you could just simply kind of nudge the track here by the master timeline. So let's say you wanted to adjust by seconds or whatever, milliseconds, whatever resolution you need. So you could try that on a duplicate track. But that would be the way I would approach it. But there might be some other way. But just off the top of my head, I think that's what is the best path. All right, we'll see if there's any more questions that are coming in. Did everyone learn a couple new tricks tonight? All right, I'll wait a minute and see if there's any more questions. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Okay, so a question from Saeed on within Very Audio, kind of turning it into a MIDI track. Let me make sure I'm reading it right. Okay, so if you want to take like your Very Audio data here. So once it's kind of done the analysis of the part, so in the Very Audio tab here, you could actually say extract MIDI. So now you could incorporate like the pitch bend information. And if you want it to be kind of carried over to like a VST 3.5 instrument, you could do that, and you can say, okay, I wanted to create the dynamic velocity so that the dynamics are retained. And also you could just say I wanted to place on an existing track, the project clipboard, or a new MIDI track. So I'm just going to say new MIDI track. And then should be added directly kind of at the bottom of our screen here. So now we can see this is the MIDI information that was extracted from the pitch bend data, or from that vocal part. And if you wanted to print that out, it's pretty simple. So then you could just kind of double up your instrument. And if you're doing, what's really interesting, if you have kind of different Middle Eastern tunings and stuff like that, sometimes that could actually kind of extract the pitch bend, translate it into pitch bend data. But also kind of as a much higher, finer resolution, you could have it do velocity, the VST3 velocity curves as well. So you can kind of get, much greater resolution of detail, like in between traditional pitches as well. So, but once again, just kind of select the part in the Very Audio editor. Once you have that part selected, just go here to at the very bottom, extract MIDI, and click on that icon, and it'll turn it into MIDI information. Okay, we see, is there any way to render a MIDI into a mono track? So generally, the routing kind of follows the output. So if I wanted to come here, let's say I have my piano part here. Okay, if I wanted to render this, now I could choose to, I'm going to add a VST connection here. So if you want to do like kick or snare or whatever, so I'm going to go to my VST connections, and then I'm going to just add a mono output. And it doesn't really even have to be assigned anywhere. And then once I come here, I'm going to open this up. And then I want this let me just I'll just take a bass part here. Then, so if it's routed, let me just see if I can get this going here real quick. Just try another project here, or I'll revert this one. Oh, my Cubase misbehaved. Sorry about that. All right. But I think if you route it to a mono output, that then when you go to, if you do an export audio mix down, it'll just be rendered as a mono track. So I'll just get this rebooted here real quick. So let's say if I just come here to quick instrument track, and let me just add a quick some quick notes here real quick. Okay, let me just do a quick mono out. I think I can do this. And then I think if it's set to a mono output, that I could even, let's see what happens if I render in place real quick. I'll just say, well, all right, so render place will do it as stereo. But now if I do an export audio mix down, and we could just say we just want it to have our Halion Sonic SE, and we'll import this directly into our project. I'm going to set my left and right locators here, sorry. And then it's just made a mono output from that. So the kind of the output configuration when doing the export audio mix down is kind of based on the busing of the actual audio channel. So if we just want to listen to this, we can just grab our play tool, and then you're all set. So that'll be all you need to do. Yeah, I think the render is still going to have it go to the stereo output. So, but try just that, and I think that'll do the trick for you. Let's see if there's any last minute questions before we wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the Google Hangout. I hope everyone's learned a couple new tricks. It's great to see people from all over the world. I think it's the first time we've had someone from Iran on, so I think that's wonderful. If you have topics for future meetings, you can just kind of enter them in directly here, or if you want to email me at gondo, Gondo, at yamaha.com. I'd be happy to kind of incorporate them into the next Google Hangout. We'll wait just a couple minutes if there's any more last minute questions. If not, then we'll wrap up. And I want to thank everyone again for joining the Google Hangout, and hope everyone enjoyed it and learned a couple new tricks. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see you next month. Goodbye.